The aroma of fresh-baked sourdough filled Sweet Dreams Bakery as Sarah Martinez prepared for another dawn in Pine Creek, Colorado. When three men in raggedy clothes pushed through her door at 5:47 a.m., she noticed their prison-issue boots before. Their desperate expressions. Most people would see three dangerous escapees casing their next target. Sarah saw bounties, $50,000, $75,000, and $100,000. For 8 years, she'd hidden her past behind cookie sheets and cake pans, transforming from La Cazadora, the West's most feared bounty hunter, into the town's beloved baker. Now, as the men's hands drifted toward concealed weapons, Sarah smiled. They had no idea they'd just walked into the deadliest trap of their lives. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Sarah's day always started at 3:30 a.m., precise as a military operation. Old habits died hard. She'd unlock Sweet Dreams Bakery's back door at exactly 3:45 after checking the alley's shadows and testing the door's hidden alarm sensors. Security. Cameras disguised as vintage decorations covered every angle. To anyone else, they looked like charming antiques. To Sarah, they were survival. The kitchen was her command center now. Instead of weapon racks, industrial mixers lined the walls. Rather than surveillance monitors, proofing cabinets hummed quietly. But beneath the stainless steel prep table, a fingerprint-locked compartment held everything from her old life: ceramic knives, garrots disguised as measuring tape, and enough firepower to start a small war. "Time to wake up, old friend," she whispered to the industrial oven, its massive frame concealing a reinforced panic room. As heat filled the kitchen, Sarah began her dance, a choreographed routine perfected over 8 years of hiding in plain sight. First came the sourdough, her starter lovingly maintained, like she once maintained her weapons. The rhythmic kneading helped her scan the street through reflection in the windows. By 4:30, the first batch filled the air with a homey scent that made Pine Creek's residents smile and helped them forget to ask too many questions about the mysterious woman who'd appeared in their town 8 years ago. Sheriff Tom Riley's cruiser rolled past at 4:45, right on schedule. He'd wave, she'd smile, neither mentioning that time last year when she'd spotted the cartel hitman targeting him and quietly ensured the problem disappeared. The official story involved a mountain lion attack, much cleaner that way. The morning regulars started arriving at 6 marks sharp. First was old Joe, retired postal worker, who reminded her of her first weapons trainer, same sharp eyes hiding behind a harmless demeanor. He always ordered a cinnamon roll and coffee, settling into the corner seat that offered the best view of both entrances. Sarah suspected he wasn't as retired as he claimed. Next came the morning rush of miners heading to the silver mine up north. They'd grab coffee and her special miner's bread, dense enough to fuel a long shift underground. She'd developed the recipes specifically for them, just as she'd once developed specialized tracking techniques for different types of targets. Emily Chen, the high school chemistry teacher, always arrived at 6:45 for her morning espresso. Smart woman, asked too many questions sometimes. Sarah had to be careful around her. Emily had already noticed that the baker's forearm strength seemed excessive for someone who just needed dough. "Morning, Sarah." Today, Emily was examining the new display case Sarah had installed last week. "This looks military grade, seems a bit excessive for pastries," Sarah laughed, the sound practiced to perfect pitch. "Got a deal from a restaurant supply liquidation. You know me, always hunting for bargains." The case was actually bulletproof, but Emily didn't need to know that. The morning continued its careful choreography. Sarah maintained her cover with the precision that had once made her legendary in certain circles. Every smile was measured, every conversation carefully balanced between friendly and forgettable. The skills that had once helped her track dangerous fugitives now helped her hide among honest people, but she never fully relaxed. Even now, piping delicate rosettes onto a wedding cake, her situational awareness never wavered. 3 teenagers on the corner, just students waiting for the bus. Delivery truck idling too long. Legitimate. She'd checked the driver's credentials. Last week, unknown car driving past twice. Tourist looking for the highway based on the rental company sticker. This was her life now, walking the razor's edge between her past and present. Every day required the same focus she'd once needed. For high-stakes manhunts, one slip, one moment of reverting to old instincts too obviously, and her cover would crack. In Pine Creek, Colorado, population 2,543, secrets didn't stay buried long, unless, of course, you were very, very good at burying them. Sarah checked her security feeds one more time, hidden in the harmless-looking tablet she used for recipes. Everything clear, but something felt off today, a familiar tension in her shoulders that usually meant trouble was coming. She'd learned long ago to trust those instincts. Time would tell if today would be the day her 2 worlds collided. Sarah's hands stilled on the cookie dough as a particular date caught her eye on the wall calendar. 8 years ago today, La Cazadora had officially died in a warehouse explosion in Ciudad Juarez. The cartel papers had celebrated. The bounty hunting world had mourned. And Sarah Martinez had bought a small bakery in Colorado with cash. She allowed herself a rare moment of remembrance as she shaped the dough. That last hunt had been spectacular, tracking El Coyote, the uncatchable human trafficker, through 3 countries. The media had called him a ghost. Sarah had proved them wrong with a ceramic blade and perfect timing. The blast that faked her death had been necessary. Too many enemies, too many powerful people wanting revenge. The bounty hunting world had changed, become darker. When cartels started putting prices on hunters' heads, many of her colleagues disappeared. Those who stayed changed, became little better than the criminals they chased. More coffee, Ms. Martinez. Tommy Chen, Emily's son, worked weekends at the bakery. Smart kid, reminded her of Joey, her old tech guy who'd helped orchestrate her death. Thanks, Tommy. She watched him move between tables. His route was efficient, tactical almost. Natural instinct or learned behavior. She'd have to watch that. The memories surfaced like old wounds. Her first bounty, aged 22. A bail jumper in Texas thought he could outrun a rookie female hunter. She'd caught him in 6 hours, using only public records and observation. The veteran hunters had laughed until they saw her technique. Nobody laughed after her 3rd catch that week. By 25, she'd earned the name La Cazadora, the hunter. Federal marshals started calling her for consultation. Cartels added her name to their briefings. She developed a reputation for impossible. Catches, the ones who'd escaped everyone else, the ghosts no one could track. Her methods were unique. While others relied on informants and brute force, she understood human nature. People were creatures of pattern, even criminals, especially criminals. Watch long enough, quietly enough, and everyone revealed their weaknesses. Like the baker who'd sold her this place. He'd been ready to retire, happy to find an eager buyer who knew sourdough, never questioned why she paid in cash or why she insisted on renovating the basement herself. Now that basement held a command center that would make federal agencies jealous, hidden behind wine racks and flour storage. The bell above the door chimed. Sarah's hand instinctively moved toward the knife hidden in her apron before recognizing Marshal Dan Roberts. He wasn't just here for coffee. That particular tension in his shoulders, the way his eyes swept the room. He had news. Your usual. Marshal? She asked, keeping her voice light. 8 years ago, they'd worked cases together. Now they maintained the fiction of casual acquaintance. Thanks, Sarah. Quiet morning. Their code hadn't changed. Quiet meant trouble. So far. Heard there might be storms coming, though. She handed him a coffee and cranberry muffin. Their fingers brushed. He passed her a tiny memory card. She'd built this network carefully over The years. Retired marshals, ex-hunters, even a few reformed criminals. They kept her informed while maintaining her cover. The information flow never stopped. She just didn't act on it anymore, usually. The weight of her old tactical watch felt heavy on her wrist. It looked like a vintage timepiece, matched her carefully crafted image. Only she knew about the encrypted communication system inside or the garrote wire in the band. Old habits died hard. Tommy dropped a plate near the kitchen, the crash triggering another memory. Tijuana, 2014. A cartel enforcer who specialized in torturing witnesses. She'd tracked him for 3 weeks, learning his patterns, watching his weaknesses. The takedown had been silent, efficient. The bounty had been enough to buy 3 bakeries. The doorbell chimed again. Sarah's focus snapped back to the present as 3 men entered, the kind of men who tried too hard to look innocent. Her instincts hummed. The way they carried themselves, the institutional shoes poorly hidden under department store jeans, prison escapees, had to be from the state facility up north. She'd been expecting this since hearing about the breakout on last night's news. Time to see if La Cazadora had lost her edge. The memory card from Marshal Roberts burned in Sarah's pocket as she served the 3 newcomers. Their body language screamed institutional conditioning, the way they sat against walls, how they clocked exits, their instinctive flinching when Tommy dropped another plate. Prison habits were hard to break. "Coffee, gentlemen." She kept her voice warm, unthreatening. The leader, tall with a poorly concealed snake tattoo creeping above his collar, tried to smile naturally. "Yes, ma'am, and whatever's fresh from the oven." His accent was educated, Eastern Seaboard, not your typical state prison inmate. Sarah's tablet quietly ran facial recognition as she worked. The security cameras she'd disguised as vintage decor captured every angle, feeding data to the system she'd modified from her hunting days. Modern technology, hidden behind a carefully curated small-town aesthetic. The morning news played quietly on the small TV above the counter. Another touch of normalcy that provided vital intelligence. The broadcast shifted to breaking news. 3 dangerous inmates had escaped from Mountain View Correctional, just 40 miles north. No photos released yet. Police warned they were armed and dangerous. Sarah watched Snake Tattoo tense slightly at the news. His companions, one stocky with boxer's hands, one wiry with nervous energy, shifted uncomfortably. The tablet vibrated. Matches found. As she steamed milk for another customer's latte, Sarah processed the intel. Jonathan Professor Maxwell. Snake Tattoo. Former financial advisor serving life for murdering 3 clients who discovered his Ponzi scheme. Marcus Tank Williams, the boxer type, ex-military turned mercenary. Peter Walsh, the nervous one, expert hacker wanted in 4 countries, not your typical escapees. This was a crew assembled for something specific. The bell chimed again. Sheriff Riley entered, earlier than his usual second coffee run. His eyes locked briefly with Sarah's. He'd noticed the newcomers too. Their morning coffee ritual had long ago evolved into a subtle information exchange. "Sarah, have you heard from your sister up in Mountain View lately?" Riley asked casually as she poured his usual. They both knew she had no sister. Mountain View was the prison's location. Not. "Since yesterday morning," she replied, coding her message. She'd track them. He'd coordinate with state police. The escapees were growing anxious. Sarah caught fragments of whispered conversation. "Time window closing. Need the access codes. Stick to the plan." Her tablet vibrated again. The memory card from Roberts contained surveillance photos of a 4th man, one she recognized. Victor Kane, former bounty hunter turned criminal. He'd worked the same circuits as La Cazadora years ago, until he started helping fugitives instead of catching them. For the right price, he'd provide new identities, safe houses, and clean getaways. If Kane was involved, this was bigger than A simple prison break. Tommy approached their table with fresh coffee. Sarah tensed, ready to intervene, but the boy showed surprising awareness. He kept the pot in his right hand, maintaining distance, his stance balanced. Definitely not just natural instinct. Anything else I can get you, gentlemen? We're fine. Kid, Professor responded, barely hiding his irritation at the interruption of their planning. Sarah's phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. Their mine, Cazadora. Stay out of it. So Kane knew she was here. That complicated things. Her cover was compromised, at least to him. The question was whether he'd tell his clients they were having coffee in the domain of the West's deadliest bounty hunter. The morning crowd was thinning. Emily Chen lingered over her coffee, grading papers but clearly aware something was off. Old Joe hadn't moved from his tactical corner. Even Mrs. Peterson, the chatty librarian, sensed the tension and made an unusually quick exit. Sarah counted. Weapons by reflection in the chrome coffee machine. Tank was carrying at least 2, badly concealed under his jacket. Walsh had something in an ankle holster. Professor was cleaner, but the bulge in his boot wasn't just an extra sock. The pieces were falling into place. A hacker, a tactical specialist, and a financial criminal, backed by a professional ghost maker. All the components for a major heist. The bakery wasn't their target. It was just a convenient stop while they waited for something else. Sarah had choices to make. She could let them go, preserve her cover, let other authorities handle it. Kane knew her identity, but maybe he'd keep quiet to avoid complications, or she could remind them why La Cazadora's bounties always came in alive, but rarely unharmed. The prison break news repeated on TV. 3 escapees, considered armed and dangerous. The public was warned not to approach. Sarah smiled as she refilled their coffee cups, too late for that warning. It started with a phone call. Professor's burner phone buzzed once, and Sarah watched his entire demeanor shift. Whatever countdown they'd been waiting on had reached 0. Now, he said quietly, and the peaceful morning exploded into chaos. Tank. Move first, covering the distance to the door in 2 strides, flipping the sign to closed and drawing a Glock from his waistband. Walsh secured the blinds while producing his own weapon. Within seconds, the bright, cheerful bakery transformed into a tactical space. "Ladies and gentlemen," Professor announced, his educated voice carrying authority, "I apologize for the interruption to your morning coffee. Please remain calm and cooperative, and this will be over quickly." Sarah counted 7 civilians, Emily Chen still at her table clutching ungraded papers. Old Joe suspiciously calm in his corner, a young couple by the window. Tommy behind the counter, and 2 businessmen who'd stopped for breakfast meetings. 8 potential hostages, if you counted her. "Phones in the basket," Walsh commanded, producing a plastic container from his backpack. Slowly, no heroes. Sarah watched her customers comply, noting their reactions. Emily's hands shook, but her eyes were calculating. Old Joe moved with deliberate slowness that Sarah recognized as tactical patience. The young couple clung to each other, terrified. The businessman showed the blank compliance of those unused to violence. "Ms. Martinez," Professor turned to her, all pretense of friendliness gone. "I believe you have a back office. Please lead." The way, Sarah let her hands tremble as she wiped them on her apron. "The money's in the register," she offered, voice carefully fearful. "Just take it. This isn't about your cookie money," Tank growled. "Move!" As they herded her toward the back, Sarah mapped their positions by sound. Tank covering the hostages, Walsh on the door, Professor close behind her. Their movements were coordinated, professional. This was rehearsed. Her office door opened to reveal her carefully crafted image, recipe books, supply invoices, a desktop computer that looked 10 years old. The real system was hidden in the walls, currently recording everything. "Sit, Professor," commanded, gesturing to her chair. "Log in." Sarah's fingers hesitated over the keyboard. "I don't understand." "The basement server room," he snapped. "We know it's here. Kane's intel is never wrong." So that was it. Kane had sold them more than escape routes. He'd discovered what Sarah had buried beneath her bakery, the secure server farm she rented, to certain privacy-minded clients, a side business that paid better than pastries, requiring her particular blend of discretion and security. "I'm just a baker," she protested weakly. Professor's hand closed around her throat, not squeezing but threatening. The legendary Cazadora, reduced to hiding behind flour and sugar. "Kane warned us you might play dumb. Now log in, or we start reducing the hostage count." A scream from the front confirmed Tank's willingness to enforce this threat. Sarah let her shoulders slump in defeat. The terminal's in the basement. As Professor marched her toward the basement door, she caught Tommy's eye. The boy gave an almost imperceptible nod. Not just good instincts, then. Training. She'd have to find out who he really was, assuming they survived the next few hours. The basement door opened to reveal steep stairs, descending into shadow. Sarah's fingers found the light switch, illuminating her other world. Behind the wine racks and flour storage lay a state-of-the-art server room, humming with climate-controlled efficiency. "After you," Professor gestured with his weapon. Sarah started down the stairs, counting steps. Everything was about to change. She could maintain her cover, give them what they wanted, preserve the life she'd built here. Or her hand brushed the hidden sensor on the handrail, time to show them why. La Cazadora had never lost a prey. The basement air hummed with server fans and tension as Sarah reached the bottom step. Professor's breath was close behind her, his gun a constant presence at her back. Above, muffled sounds of panic filtered through the ceiling. Tank making. His point with the hostages, "Quite an operation for a simple baker," Professor observed, taking in the sophisticated setup. 3 rows of servers stretched into the shadows, their status lights blinking like electronic heartbeats. Kane said, "You'd gone soft, but this," he gestured at the security systems. "You've just changed hunting grounds, haven't you?" Sarah kept her movements slow, deliberate. "Information is more valuable than bounties these days." Speaking of information, Professor's gun pressed harder. "Access the central terminal. We need everything from server block C." A commotion upstairs interrupted them. Walsh's voice carried down, "We've got company! Police units! Multiple directions." Sarah smiled inwardly. Sheriff Riley worked fast. Through the basement's hidden monitoring system, she watched cruisers surround the bakery. But something was off about their deployment, too aggressive for Riley's usual tactics. "Your friends upstairs are getting nervous," she said quietly. "They're professionals, unlike these small-town cops." Professor keyed his radio. "Tank, status? 8 hostages secured. Chen woman's getting mouthy, though. Might need to make an example." Sarah's muscles tensed. Emily was smart, probably already planning something that could either help or complicate things drastically. A new voice crackled over the radio. Someone outside. "This is Special Agent Phillips, FBI hostage." "Rescue, you're surrounded. Let's talk." "FBI?" This was escalating faster than expected. Sarah caught Professor's reaction in a server cabinet's reflection. A smile. He'd expected this. "Right on schedule," he muttered. The pieces clicked. This wasn't just about her servers. The FBI's presence was too convenient. Their response, too quick. Kane hadn't just sold her location, he'd orchestrated this entire situation. Upstairs, the tension ratcheted higher. Tommy's voice carried down, "Sir, please, my inhaler sits in my backpack." "Shut up, kid." Tank's response was followed by sounds of struggle. Professor's radio crackled again. "Boss, the kid's having an asthma attack. Real or fake? It's drawing attention. Every phone on the street's filming us." Sarah watched the security feeds. Tommy's attack had drawn the other hostages to him, clustering them away from the windows. Old Joe had shifted position, now having clear lines of sight to both Walsh and Tank. Not a coincidence. Your show's drawing quite an audience, Sarah noted, fingers hovering over the terminal keyboard. HRT doesn't like waiting. They'll wait for exactly 11 more minutes, Professor replied confidently. Now, the server access codes, or TANK, starts reducing our audience. Sarah entered a command string, apparently complying. In reality, she was activating her system's ghost protocol. Let them think they were getting what they wanted. The radio crackled with Agent Phillips' voice again. We're getting reports of a possible medical emergency inside. Send out the boy, show good faith. Counteroffer, Professor responded. You clear the South Street in 5 minutes, or we send out the boy. Most of him, anyway. Sarah's fingers paused on the keyboard. The situation was balanced on a knife's edge. Tommy's fake attack had changed the hostage dynamics. Old Joe was clearly more than he appeared. Emily was planning something. And outside, the FBI's presence suggested layers to this operation she hadn't yet uncovered. Then her secret terminal, hidden behind the wine rack, flashed a message that changed everything. Priority alert. Server Block C contains FBI undercover operation files. Unauthorized access will expose active agents. Now she understood. This wasn't about money or data. It was about exposing federal informants. The hostage situation was theater, designed to force her to unlock the servers while making it look like she had no choice. Kane hadn't just found her. He'd sold her to someone who wanted to tear apart federal operations from the inside. The powder keg was already lit. The only question was who would control the explosion. Sarah's fingers danced across the keyboard, apparently complying with Professor's demands, while her mind raced through scenarios. The server room's humidity had increased slightly, a subtle change only she would notice. The environmental controls were responding to her ghost protocol, preparing for what was coming. Access granted to Block C, she announced, her voice trembling perfectly. The download will take 6 minutes. Professor checked his watch. We have 8. Plenty of time. He keyed his radio. Tank, status update. Kids breathing better. Got them all sitting against the far wall. FBI still holding position. Sarah watched the security feeds through reflections in the server cabinets. Tommy's recovery had achieved exactly what she suspected. The hostages were now grouped away from the zones she'd designated as kill boxes years ago when designing the bakery's security system. You're very calm for someone who's lost everything, Professor observed, studying her. Your precious cover blown. 8 years of hiding finished. Sarah let her shoulders slump. What choice do I have? That's what Kane said you'd say. But he also said never to trust your surrender. The gun pressed harder against her spine. The legendary Cazadora wouldn't give up her secrets this easily. Cazadora died in Mexico, Sarah replied bitterly. I'm just a baker who made the mistake of offering secure data storage to the wrong people. Upstairs, Emily Chen's voice carried through the floor. He needs water after an attack like that, please. Shut up. Tank's frustration was growing. Perfect. Sarah had profiled them all within minutes of their arrival. Tank was the weak link. Military training meant predictable responses to stress. Walsh was the runner. He'd already checked every exit twice. Professor was the real danger, smart enough to know she was playing some angle, but not smart enough to figure out which. The server download progress bar crept forward. What Professor didn't know was that her ghost protocol was feeding them encrypted gibberish, while the real FBI files were being transferred to a secure off-site location. Years of hunting had taught her to always have a backup plan. Her hidden terminal flashed another message. Facial recognition complete. Victor Kane identified in FBI surveillance van. So Kane wasn't just nearby, he was working with the FBI. The question was, which side was he really on? 4 minutes to download completion, she announced. Professor nodded to himself. Plenty of time before the power cut. Sarah allowed herself a small frown, just enough to make him think he'd revealed something by accident. In reality, She'd been expecting it. The municipal power grid showed unusual access patterns this morning. Someone had arranged for a technical failure. The radio crackled. "Boss," Walsh's voice was tense. "That old guy in the corner keeps staring at me. Something's not right about him." Sarah suppressed a smile. Old Joe was getting to them just by sitting there radiating calm competence. She'd recognized his type the first time he'd walked into her bakery. Retired operator, probably CIA. They'd maintained a professional courtesy for years, neither acknowledging what they saw in the other. "Two civilians asking for bathroom breaks," Tank reported, "getting harder to control them all." "No movement," Professor ordered. 3 minutes, and we're gone." Sarah watched the humidity levels rise another fraction. The servers generated significant heat, and she'd designed the cooling system with certain alternative functions in mind. Right now, microscopic water droplets were condensing on specific surfaces, preparing for what was coming. Her hidden message system flashed again. "Sheriff. Riley requesting status. Execute Protocol Alpha." Using just her left hand, shielded by her body from Professor's view, she tapped out a response on a concealed panel. Negative. Maintain holding pattern. Riley had been her first ally in Pine Creek, the only one who knew her real identity from the start. They'd worked out multiple response scenarios for situations like this, but with FBI files and Kane's presence complicating things, they needed a more subtle approach. "Download at 85%, she reported. Professor shifted slightly, his weight moving. To his back foot. A tell, he was preparing for action. The power cut would come before the download completed. They didn't actually want the files. They wanted to force a security reset during the transfer process. That's when their real attack would start." Sarah allowed herself one slow breath, centering. Above her, Tommy coughed, a pattern. 3 short, 1 long. Old Joe cleared his throat in response. Emily Chen dropped something, the sound sharp and deliberate, everyone in position. La Cazadora had never really died. She just learned to hunt differently, and right now her prey had walked right into her favorite kind of trap. One where they thought they were the predators. Mexico City, 2015. Sarah had tracked a cartel assassin to a crowded marketplace, watching him think he was safe among the tourists and vendors. He never realized the old woman selling flowers was wearing a tactical watch identical to the one she wore now, counting down in her basement. 2 minutes to completion, she announced, letting anxiety creep into her voice. Professor wouldn't recognize the parallels, but she was using the same technique now, letting her target's confidence work against them. The assassin had walked right past her flower cart, just like Professor stood behind her now, thinking. He controlled the situation. "Your reputation was legendary," Professor mused, almost conversational. "La Cazadora, the hunter who could track anyone, anywhere. Kane told stories about you. Said you once caught a target by predicting where he'd be based on his coffee preferences." Sarah allowed herself a small smile. "Costa Rica, 2014. Money launderer. Who only drank a specific Ethiopian roast. There were only 3 suppliers in the country. The memory was clear. Waiting in the tiny cafe, timing it perfectly. Sometimes the smallest habits are the deadliest. Like how Walsh upstairs kept checking his phone every 30 seconds, how Tank's trigger finger twitched when he was stressed, how Professor shifted his weight before making decisions. The server room humidity had reached optimal levels. On her hidden screen, facial recognition was tracking every movement upstairs through the bakery's cameras. Old Joe had shifted exactly 3 inches left. Emily Chen had moved her papers 4 times. Tommy's breathing had settled into a distinctive pattern. "You know what else Kane told me?" Professor's voice carried a new edge. "He said you never took a shot unless you'd planned 3 moves ahead. Said you treated every hunt like a chess game. The Mexico City assassin had thought the same way, right up until the flower cart's hidden compartment opened. 90% complete, Sarah reported, watching the fake progress bar. The real files were already secure. 1 minute until the lights went out. Emergency lighting bathed the server room in red as UPS systems kicked in, right on schedule. "Don't move," Professor warned, but Sarah could hear the satisfaction in his voice. Everything was going according to their plan and hers. The humidity she'd been building reached critical levels. Emergency lighting reflected off thousands of microscopic water droplets in the air, creating a subtle haze. Most people wouldn't notice, but it would play hell with laser sight beams. Upstairs, chaos erupted right on cue. "I can't breathe." Tommy's voice, panic perfect. A crash followed, Emily Chen's papers accidentally scattering. Multiple footsteps. As hostages moved in practice patterns they didn't even realize they'd been taught over months of coffee and conversation. "Control them!" Professor barked into his radio. "They're panicking!" Tank responded, stress evident. The kid's having another attack. The woman's trying to help him. The old man... Static cut the transmission. Professor's breath caught. Sarah allowed herself another small smile, hidden in the darkness. The humidity wasn't just affecting laser sights. At exactly the right density, it could also disrupt certain radio frequencies, just like in Mexico City, when the assassin's phone had failed at the crucial moment. "The servers," Professor growled. "We need to..." A new sound cut through the chaos. Police sirens, but not from the units already on scene. These were coming from the north, state police special response teams, arriving exactly when the power cut would have signaled any watching observers to move. Sarah's hidden screen flashed one last message. Kane Mobile, moving east. So Victor was running. He'd probably realized the moment the power cut happened. The whole scenario was too perfect, too precise. It had Cazadora's fingerprints all over it. "They're too early," Professor muttered. "The timing's wrong, unless..." Sarah heard the realization in his voice. The exact moment he understood. But like the assassin in Mexico City, by then it was too late. The server room's temperature had dropped 2 degrees, unnoticeable to most, but it meant the next phase was ready. The condensation she'd been building wouldn't just affect lasers and radios. When it reached the right density... "You played us," Professor said, anger replacing confidence. "This whole time you were teaching a master class," Sarah finished, finally dropping the scared baker act, in why Cazadora never lost a prey. Above them, multiple things happened simultaneously. Tommy's panic attack turned into a precise, defensive maneuver. Emily Chen's scattered papers concealed something falling from her sleeve. Old Joe's patient stillness exploded into action. And in the server room, Sarah Martinez, Cazadora, began reminding everyone why some legends never die. The server room exploded into action as Sarah dropped and rolled. The movement so fluid, Professor's first shot hit empty air. The humidity she'd built up diffracted the emergency lighting, creating multiple shadow images. An old hunter's trick that had saved her life in darker places than this. "Tank! Walsh! She's playing us!" Professor's radio crackled uselessly against the engineered interference. Upstairs, Sarah's carefully orchestrated chaos unfolded. Tommy's latest attack had positioned him perfectly beside the fire suppression control panel. Emily Chen's scattered papers concealed ceramic throwing spikes. Sarah had noticed her palm them from beneath the table weeks ago, said nothing. Old Joe's patience finally paid off as he moved with the speed that had once made him legendary in agencies that didn't officially exist. "You thought Cazadora was just a hunter," Sarah said, her voice seemingly coming from multiple directions in the humid air. "I was always more of a teacher." The bakery's power cut had triggered exactly what Professor's team expected. Emergency protocols, security resets, confusion. What they didn't know was that Sarah had spent 8 years teaching her regular customers exactly what to do in such chaos. Not obviously, never directly, but through countless small suggestions, casual comments, and carefully staged accidents. A crash upstairs signaled Tommy executing the move she'd taught him by accidentally demonstrating it 100 times while cleaning tables. Emily Chen's papers made the exact sound Sarah knew they would. She'd picked that particular weight of cardstock specifically for this scenario. "The servers," Professor snarled, trying to reach the main terminal. "We still need—" The temperature dropped another degree. Right on schedule, condensation reached critical levels. Metal surfaces became subtly slick. Gun grips grew treacherous with invisible moisture. Sarah moved like smoke through her own carefully crafted environment. She'd designed this room for moments like this, every surface and shadow measured and mapped. The hunting grounds of Cazadora weren't limited to dusty border towns anymore. Upstairs, Tank's frustrated voice carried through the floor. "They're not staying down!" The old man, a grunt of pain, cut off his transmission. Sarah allowed herself a small smile. She'd seen old Joe's technique that first day he'd walked in, recognized the distinctive way he handled his coffee cup. Only certain agencies taught. That particular grip. "Your team's falling apart," she told Professor, still invisible in the diffracted light. "Walsh is 3 steps from running. He's been checking that back exit since you arrived. Tank's training makes him predictable under stress. And you—" She let the pause stretch. "You never questioned why a baker would have military-grade environmental controls in her server room." Professor's next shot went wide, the humid air playing tricks with his depth perception. The bullet sparked off a server rack, exactly where Sarah had calculated it would. The ricochet pattern was by design, like everything else. "Kane warned us," Professor admitted, frustration evident. "Said you never really retired, just changed territories. Said we'd be idiots to think you'd lost your edge." "Kane talks too much." Sarah's voice echoed. "Always did. That's why he never made it to the top tier. Good hunters understand the value of silence." A new sound cut through the chaos. Helicopter rotors approaching. Sarah's hidden screen confirmed. FBI tactical units, right on schedule. They'd waited exactly as long as she'd predicted before deciding to breach. "Your extraction windows." "Closing," she noted conversationally. "If Kane's plan was to use the FBI raid as cover for your escape, you're running out of time." Professor's laugh held no humor. "You think Kane's running this? He's just another player, like us. The real question is—" He turned slowly, gun tracking shadows. "Who hired him to find you?" Sarah processed this new information. Kane was working multiple angles. Typical, but someone powerful enough to point him at Cazadora. That suggested bigger game. Upstairs, the situation was reaching crescendo. Tommy's voice carried down, "Now!" Sarah keyed her hidden mic once. The signal transmitted. At exactly that moment, the bakery's fire suppression system activated, but not water. The special compound she'd loaded into it months ago filled the air upstairs, disrupting depth perception and creating instant chaos. "Interesting choice," Professor commented, recognizing the tactic. "The same compound you used in that warehouse. In Juarez, the one where Cazadora supposedly died. Almost the same," Sarah corrected. "I've made some improvements." The next few seconds would demonstrate exactly what those improvements were. Cazadora was done playing defense. The local news van arrived just as Sarah's compound filled the bakery's upper floor. Perfect timing, exactly as Kane would have arranged it. Live coverage meant the FBI couldn't risk a tactical breach, not with cameras rolling and social media, ready to broadcast any casualties. "Clever," Professor admitted, still trying to track her through the server room's engineered chaos. "Using media coverage as a shield, another one of Kane's old tricks." Kane always did think he was the smartest player in the game. Sarah's voice echoed from multiple directions. Never realized he was usually the one being played. Her hidden screen flashed new information. Kane's vehicle had stopped exactly where she'd predicted. The dead zone between FBI surveillance. Positions. Close enough to monitor, far enough to escape if needed. Some habits never changed. Upstairs, her carefully orchestrated symphony continued. Emily Chen's voice carried down, pitched perfectly to be caught by the news crew's parabolic microphones. "Please, we have children in here. Pure theatre, but effective." Sarah had noticed Emily's community theatre background during their morning conversations, now that talent was paying off, adding pressure to an already volatile situation. "Your cover's blown," Professor noted, trying to draw her out. 8 years of hiding wasted. The media's going to dig into everything now. Every database, every connection. Someone will recognize La Cazadora. You assume this identity was the only cover. Sarah let satisfaction color her tone. The baker was just the surface. What's underneath? That's what Kane's employer really wants to know. A flash of uncertainty crossed Professor's face. Caught in the emergency lighting's red glow. She'd planted the seed of doubt, make him question whether he was really in control, whether he understood the true game. Her tablet vibrated. FBI tactical frequencies showed increasing chatter. They'd identified multiple federal agents among her hostages. Old Joe wasn't the only one who'd been quietly watching her bakery. The question was, were they watching her or waiting for someone else? "You know what's interesting?" Sarah maneuvered through the shadows as she spoke. "Kane thinks he found me by tracking my server business, but someone had to point him here first. Someone who knew enough about La Cazadora to recognize her pattern." "Maybe you're not as clever as you think," Professor countered, but his voice held a note of uncertainty. "Or maybe," Sarah suggested, "this whole scenario was designed to flush out exactly who's been hunting La Cazadora all these years." The humidity reached its final planned level. Every surface now held a microscopic layer of conductive moisture, including the grips of Professor's gun, the radio components, and most importantly, the server racks themselves. Her hidden screen showed the external feed, news vans multiplying, social media buzz growing. The story was trending locally. Soon it would hit national feeds. Everyone watching, everyone filming. Perfect cover for what was really happening. Tommy's voice carried down again, this time with an edge only Sarah would recognize. "Sir, there's something weird happening with the lights." The trap was almost ready, but Professor's next words caught her attention. "You think you're so far ahead of everyone," he said, frustration bleeding into anger. "But Kane's employer didn't just find you. They found all of you, every hunter who disappeared, everyone who went straight, the whole network." Sarah's mind raced. The other hunters who'd quit the game. Faces flashed through her memory. Specialists who'd vanished into normal lives, like her. Each one probably thinking they were hidden just like she had. "How many servers like this are out there?" Professor pressed his advantage. "How many retired hunters are really information brokers now? That's what Kane's employer wants, the whole shadow network you all built." The pieces clicked. Her bakery wasn't the only target. Right now, across the country, other retired hunters might be facing their own carefully orchestrated exposures. Her tablet confirmed similar hostage situations reported in 4 other states, all involving seemingly innocent businesses. All with suspicious server installations. "Now you're seeing it," Professor smiled in the darkness. "You're not the hunter anymore, La Cazadora. You're the bait." Sarah processed this revelation even as her trap reached final position. Someone had turned the hunters into prey. The question was, proceed with her plan or let this play out to identify the bigger threat. The lights flickered again. Tommy's signal. Time to decide. La Cazadora had never believed in coincidences, but she'd always loved turning traps back on those who set them. Sarah's hidden screen flashed with incoming data about the other situations across the country. a coffee shop in Seattle, a small accounting firm in Atlanta, a family restaurant in Chicago, all fronts for former hunters, all under siege. The Chiyo pattern was elegant, she had to admit. Someone had been watching them for years, learning their methods, adapting them. "You're quieter now," Professor noted, still trying to track her through the engineered haze. Finally realizing the scale of what's happening, her tablet lit up with a new alert. Incoming call, encrypted source. Only 3 people had this number. One was dead, one was in witness protection, and the third... "Take the call, Sarah." Kane's voice suddenly filled the server room through her hidden speakers. "I think it's time we had a proper conversation." Professor's head snapped around, searching. "You're for the source." "Kane? What are you—" "Quiet, Professor, the adults are talking." Kane's tone carried the same smug superiority Sarah remembered. "You've got company coming, Sarah, the kind that doesn't care about news cameras or civilian casualties." Through the upstairs cameras, Sarah watched 3 unmarked vans approach from the east. Not FBI. Their movement pattern was different. "Professional, but not government. Wetwork teams," Kane confirmed. "My employer wants to thank you for maintaining such excellent records on your servers. The kill teams you're about to meet, you trained half of them. Their tactics came straight from your files." Sarah's mind raced. Her servers contained detailed analysis of every technique she'd ever developed, every innovation in pursuit and capture. "In the wrong hands." "You gave them my playbook," she said, the pieces clicking. "Gave them everyone's playbooks, every retired hunter's techniques, every innovation, every countermeasure. You all thought you were so clever, building your little information empire, never realized you were creating a manual for your own elimination." Tommy's voice carried down urgently. "Multiple teams approaching. Look, military. You could have just sold us out directly," Sarah noted, buying time as she adjusted her strategy. "Why the elaborate setup?" Kane's laugh held no humor. "My employer doesn't just want you dead. They want everything. Your current networks, your active operations, your contingency plans. The hostage scenario forces you to maintain your covers, keeps you from triggering scorched earth protocols. Can't blow everything up when civilians are watching, right?" Professor shifted nervously, realizing he was now as much a pawn as anyone else. The humidity in the room had reached critical levels. Sarah's original plan was ready, but the game had changed. "Your employer," she probed, "they're not just after retired hunters, are they? This is about something bigger." Finally asking the right questions. Kane's satisfaction was palpable. "Think bigger, Sarah. Who would have the resources to track dozens of ghost operators for years? Who would benefit from having every hunter's methods and networks?" The answer hit her just as her tablet displayed new information. Facial recognition had tagged one of the approaching kill team members, former FSB, now private contractor. "A foreign intelligence service," she breathed. "They're weaponizing our methods for covert operations. Give the lady a prize, but not just one service. The highest bidder gets the whole package. Every technique, every network, every safe house and cover identity. A complete manual for dismantling Western intelligence operations, written by the best hunters in the business." Sarah watched through her cameras as the kill teams took position. They moved with mechanical precision, exactly like she would have taught them. Her own techniques turned against her. "Why tell me this?" she asked, though she already suspected. "Professional courtesy. And, Kane paused for effect. "A job offer. My employer appreciates talent. They'd rather have you working for them than eliminated. Same offer goes for any hunter smart enough to take it." Professor's grip tightened on his weapon. This wasn't what he'd signed up for. "Think about it," Kane continued. "Your cover's blown. Anyway, why go down protecting a system that hung you out to dry? Join us, help reshape the entire landscape of international intelligence." Sarah watched the kill teams begin their final approach. 8 years of building a new life, all coming down to this moment. But Kane had made one crucial mistake. He'd forgotten the first rule she'd learned as a hunter: sometimes the best trap is letting your enemy think they've trapped you. Her finger hovered over the command that would trigger her countermeasures. Time to remind everyone, while Cazadora had never been just another hunter, she'd been the one who wrote the rules. Sarah's fingers flew across her hidden keyboard, initiating sequences she'd hoped never to use. On her screen, the approaching kill teams moved with textbook precision. Her textbook. They were using her own Guadalajara protocol, designed for synchronized multi-point entry. It was like watching her own shadow approach. 2 minutes until they breach, Kane announced, still broadcasting into the server room. Time's running out for that job offer, Sarah. You know what your employer missed in all their research? Sarah's voice carried new authority. Cazadora, emerging from behind the baker's facade. Why I specialized in bringing targets back alive. Through the cameras, she watched Professor react to her tone change. He was smart enough to realize he was now the least dangerous person in the equation. Enlighten me, Kane replied. Smugness. Intact. Dead men can't spring traps. Sarah activated her first countermeasure. Throughout the bakery, hidden systems hummed to life. Living ones lead you right to their masters. Upstairs, Emily Chen's voice cut through the tension. They're at the windows! Real fear there. Good. Even her allies didn't know everything. She'd prepared. The kill teams were 30 seconds from breach points. Their formation was perfect, their timing exact. Just as she'd designed it. Just as she'd planned for someone to eventually use against her. Professor, she addressed her immediate captor, you should know your radio's been transmitting everything to the FBI for the last 10 minutes. Proof of international espionage on American soil. My gift to them. His eyes widened. The gun's humidity slicked. Grip shifted in his hand. Kane, she continued, your employer's analyst missed something in my files. The Guadalajara protocol isn't just a breach strategy, it's a backdoor into any system using it, including their own now. For the first time, Kane's voice held uncertainty. What are you talking about? Why do you think I left such detailed records? Every technique, every innovation, all designed to be tracked, stolen, and used by people exactly like your employer. The kill teams reached final position. Through her cameras, Sarah watched them prepare for synchronized breach, her own methods weaponized against her. Perfect! Now, she commanded. Multiple things happened at once. The conductive moisture she'd built up in the server room suddenly polarized, sending microscopic electrical charges through every metal surface. Professor's gun discharged harmlessly into a rack as his hands spasmed. Upstairs, the civilian hostages moved with practiced coordination. Old Joe's years of experience, Tommy's carefully hidden training, and Emily Chen's theatrical timing combined into a choreographed response to the breach. Most importantly, every kill team member's communications gear, built to Cazadora's exact specifications, stolen from her files, activated hidden protocols. Their tactical networks became open channels, broadcasting their operations to every law enforcement frequency and range. You didn't just steal my playbook, Sarah told Kane as chaos erupted. You downloaded my Trojan horse. Right now, your employer's entire operational network is being mapped through the back doors they built using my techniques. Professor slumped against a server rack, understanding finally dawning. You wanted this to happen. All of it. 8 years, Sarah confirmed. 8 years of building the perfect bait, waiting for someone to try using my methods against me. The other hunters going straight. We planned it together. Each of us leaving just enough data to be irresistible. Kane's voice held new respect. A global counterintelligence operation. The hunters became the bait. The best traps, Sarah quoted one of Kane's own favorite sayings, are the ones your targets build themselves. Through her cameras, she watched the kill teams realize their Communications were compromised. Their perfect formation dissolved as training battled confusion. Above, her allies were already moving to neutralize the chaos. "This was never about protecting my cover," she told Professor as she finally stepped into view. "It was about proving who was hunting us. Your employers just gave us everything we needed to roll up their entire network." Tommy's voice carried. "Down! FBI tactical teams moving in. They've got the kill teams in crossfire." Kane's line went silent, but Sarah's systems tracked his vehicle heading straight for an FBI checkpoint. As planned, La Cazadora never retired, she told Professor as she secured his weapons. She just found bigger prey. The baker's facade had served its purpose. Now it was time to show everyone why some legends don't need to hide anymore. They just need the right moment to strike. The bakery's security feeds painted a chaotic picture across Sarah's screens. FBI teams engaging the compromised kill squads, police securing the perimeter, news cameras capturing everything. But it was the small alert in the corner of her display that changed the game entirely. Director Kane position confirmed, not Victor Kane. Director Elizabeth Kane, head of the FBI's Ghost Operations Division, and Victor's sister. "You're still missing pieces of the puzzle," Victor's voice crackled through, the speakers now tinged with genuine amusement. "Want to know why I really gave them your playbook, Sarah?" Through the cameras, Sarah watched Elizabeth Kane step out of an unmarked vehicle, tactical teams moving to flank her. The resemblance to her brother was subtle but unmistakable. The same calculated precision in her movements, the same hunter's eyes. "Because she asked you to," Sarah replied, the final pieces clicking into place. "This whole operation, it's hers, isn't it?" Professor looked between them, understanding dawning. "We're not working for foreign intelligence." "Oh, but you are." Victor laughed. "You're just not working for who you think you are. Everyone's playing their parts perfectly. The desperate escapees, the compromised former hunter, the foreign kill teams, all to convince certain people that their perfect infiltration plan was working." Sarah's screens filled with new data as hidden protocols activated. The kill teams weren't just broadcasting their communications, they were revealing entire networks of compromised agents, safe houses and operations, a counterintelligence goldmine, all exposed because they'd used her stolen techniques. 8 years ago, Elizabeth Kane's voice cut in on a new channel. "We discovered multiple intelligence services had infiltrated federal agencies. Traditional counterintelligence couldn't root them out. They were too deeply embedded. We needed something bigger. A honeypot operation," Sarah concluded, "one big enough to make them reveal themselves." "Who better to design it than the legendary La Cazadora?" Victor added. "The hunter who specialized in making prey reveal themselves. Although I have to admit, the bakery was a nice touch." Through her cameras, Sarah watched the kill teams realize they were surrounded. Their tactical perfection crumbled as training battled the dawning understanding that they'd walked into a trap years in the making. "The other hunters," Sarah probed, "they're all part of this." "Each one carefully placed," Elizabeth confirmed. "Each offering a different piece of irresistible bait." Foreign services couldn't resist the chance to acquire the complete playbooks of America's top hunters. They committed massive resources to compromising your operations, never realizing we were compromising them back, Sarah finished. Every technique they stole was designed to be traced. Every safe house they mapped led back to their own networks. Every communication protocol they adopted gave us backdoors into their entire systems, Victor completed. Right now, counterintelligence teams across the country are rolling up decades of foreign infiltration, all because they couldn't resist using La Cazadora's methods against her. Professor slumped against the servers, the weight of understanding crushing him. The prison break, the FBI files, even Kane's betrayal, all staged. Had to make it convincing, Victor shrugged over the comms. Foreign intelligence services are paranoid by nature. They needed to believe they were the ones compromising us. Sarah's screens showed the operation expanding beyond Pine Creek. Similar hostage situations across the country were revealing more compromised networks. The hunter community hadn't retired. They'd transformed into the ultimate counterintelligence operation. Of course, Elizabeth added, we still had to maintain deniability. If this went wrong, the FBI could disavow everything. Sarah nodded. Just a bunch of retired hunters who got in over their heads. No official connection, but something wasn't quite right. Sarah's instincts, honed over decades of hunting, tingled. There's more, isn't there? This isn't just about foreign agents. A new alert flashed across her screen. Multiple high-level federal officials being quietly taken into custody across Washington. The foreign intelligence services hadn't just compromised agents, they'd turned senior American personnel. We needed them all to move at once, Elizabeth explained. Foreign services, domestic traitors, compromised officials. One massive operation to clean house. The kind of operation that could only work if nobody saw it coming. Not even most of our own people. Which is why you needed us, Sarah concluded. Hunters operating outside official channels. No bureaucracy, no leaks, no warning signs. Sarah's cameras picked up new vehicles approaching, professional operators, but definitely not government. The kind of players who worked in shadows deeper than even La Cazadora usually hunted. They're hoping to grab you in the chaos, Elizabeth explained. Your reputation plus your apparent counterintelligence capabilities, you'd be quite an asset on the private market. Sarah allowed herself a small smile. Let me guess. Taking them down would help prove certain theories about foreign intelligence operating through private military companies on U.S. soil? Like I said, Victor's smile was audible. There's a reason we came to you first, Sarah. You always did see the bigger picture. Through her screens, Sarah watched the new players move into position, confident in their own abilities. They had no idea they were walking into a trap, 8 years, and dozens of hunters in the making. Time to finish this, Elizabeth commanded. Show them why La Cazadora was always more than just another hunter. Sarah's fingers flew across her keyboard, initiating the operation's final protocols. Around the country, other hunters would be doing the same, their carefully crafted covers serving their true purpose at last. Professor, she addressed her former captor, want to help take down something bigger than you imagined? He studied her for a moment, professional respect replacing fear. 8 years running a bakery, just to set this up. You really are the best. No, Sarah corrected, watching the pieces fall into place across her screens. We're the best. All of us, and it's time to remind everyone why. The next few minutes would reshape the entire landscape of international intelligence. And it would start right here, in a small-town bakery where La Cazadora had never really been hiding. She'd been hunting bigger prey all along. Sarah's screens showed the private military contractors taking position around the bakery. 12 operators moving with the kind of precision that came from off-the-books wet work. Their gear was unmarked, high-end, and distinctly European. In design, more evidence for Elizabeth Kane's investigation into foreign intelligence using private companies as proxies. They're setting up a classic pincer movement, Professor observed, now fully committed to his new role, using your own Caracas formation against you. Almost flattering, Sarah replied, fingers dancing across keys as she prepared countermeasures. But they missed a key detail about Caracas. Through the cameras, she watched the PMC teams coordinate their approach. They were good, moving between FBI positions with practiced ease, using the media presence as cover. To most observers, they'd look like another federal tactical unit. Sarah. Old Joe's voice crackled through her comms. Emily's in position with the package. Tommy's got our guests secured, waiting on your signal. The package was something Sarah had prepared years ago, hoping never to need it. Now it was time to remind everyone why La Cazadora's reputation wasn't built on just catching targets. Director Kane, she addressed Elizabeth directly, your people are clear on the new parameters? FBI tactical units are pulling back to secondary positions, Elizabeth confirmed. Officially, we're regrouping after the hostage situation became more complex. Unofficially, we're leaving them a clear shot at their target, Victor finished. Sometimes the best trap is the obvious one. Sarah's screens tracked the PMC team's progress. They were good, but their confidence made them predictable. They thought they were exploiting chaos to grab a valuable asset. Instead, they were walking into a carefully orchestrated kill box. Professor, Sarah turned to her. Former captor, ready to help expose who really hired you? He checked the modified tablet she'd given him, now showing real-time data from the bakery's systems. 8 years as a baker, but you still had military-grade hardware just waiting to be activated. You really never stopped preparing, did you? Cazadora's best catches, she reminded him, always came from patience. Through the cameras, she watched the PMC teams reach their final positions. Their formation was perfect, exactly as she'd designed it in Caracas. Except there, she'd included one critical element they'd missed. Strike teams in position, one of the PMC leaders whispered in accented English. Their compromised comms fed every word straight to Sarah's systems. Asset is in the basement. Breach on my mark. Sarah allowed herself a small smile. Time to remind them why the Caracas protocol always ended with surrender, never casualties. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, initiating sequences hidden in the bakery's architecture for 8 years. Throughout the building, hidden systems hummed to life. Tommy, Emily, Joe. Initiate sequence Delta. Above, her allies moved with practiced precision. Emily Chen's package, a modified broadcast system, began transmitting on frequencies that would play havoc with the PMC team's advanced combat systems. Tommy's secured hostages were actually positioned to block specific angles of fire. And old Joe, my pleasure, the former operative replied, moving to his designated position. The PMC teams were seconds from breach. Their confidence was absolute. They had superior numbers, equipment, and training. They thought they were about to capture Cazadora. Director Kane, Sarah addressed her true employer, ready to document some foreign operators conducting illegal actions on U.S. soil. Multiple federal surveillance platforms repositioning now, Elizabeth confirmed. Whatever you're about to do, we'll have it from every angle. Sarah's screens showed all pieces in position, the PMC teams prepared for breach. FBI units waited in strategic positions, ready to respond to whatever happened next. News cameras rolled, documenting everything, and beneath it all, Sarah's systems tracked every communication, every movement, every piece of evidence they'd need. Professor, she said quietly, watch carefully. You're about to see why Cazadora specialized in bringing targets in alive. Because dead men can't lead you to their masters, he quoted her earlier words, understanding dawning. No, Sarah, corrected as her finger hovered over the final command. Because there's something much more satisfying than elimination. Through her cameras, she watched the PMC teams tense for action. They thought they were about to spring their trap. None of them realized they were already caught. Total surrender, she finished, is always better than partial victory. The next few minutes would demonstrate exactly why Cazadora's reputation had made even hardened operators nervous. These PMC teams were about to learn the difference between using her methods and understanding them. The hunt was ending. The real game was about to begin. Time crystallized in the server room as Sarah watched the PMC teams reach final position. Through her surveillance network, every player was visible. The private contractors thinking they had control, FBI teams waiting in the shadows. Her own. Allies positioned precisely, 8 years of preparation, culminating in these crucial moments. 30 seconds to breach, Victor Kane's voice carried through her secure channel. Sister dear, your surveillance platform's in position. Full coverage. Elizabeth Kane confirmed. Every move they make will be documented. State Department's going to have a hard time explaining foreign operators conducting unauthorized missions on U.S. soil. Sarah's screens showed the full tactical picture. The PMC teams had adapted her Caracas protocol perfectly, except for one crucial detail she'd never included in her files. Some lessons you had to learn in person. Professor, she addressed her former captor, now unexpected ally. Notice anything interesting about their formation? He studied the tactical display. They're setting up exactly like the files showed. Wait. His eyes narrowed. The angles are wrong. In Caracas, you always left a pressure release valve, Sarah finished. A controlled way for targets to think they could escape. She allowed herself a small smile. They copied the formation, but missed the philosophy. Through the cameras, she watched the PMC team leader signal final positions. 12 operators, each carrying enough firepower to level the block, all focused on capturing one retired hunter. Tommy, she called through her comm. Status. Package is hot, her young ally replied. Emily's broadcast system is ready. Old Joe says to tell you he's feeling nostalgic about Budapest. Whatever that means. Sarah's smile widened. Joe's Budapest operation was legendary in certain circles. The last time anyone had tried to corner him. It hadn't ended well for... And them. My teams are picking up new chatter, Elizabeth reported. Looks like your PMC friends have some backup they didn't tell their employers about. 3 more units approaching from the north. Perfect. The more players showed their hands, the more complete their investigation would be. Sarah's fingers flew across her keyboard, adjusting parameters for the additional targets. Sarah, Victor's voice carried new urgency. We've got confirmation. They're backup teams. They're flying diplomatic covers. Your bakery's about to host an international incident, Professor whistled low. Foreign intelligence services operating directly on U.S. soil. This is bigger than a grab for hunter techniques. It always was, Sarah confirmed. 8 years of building the perfect bait, not just for criminal organizations or private military companies, but for any foreign service bold enough to operate here directly, Elizabeth finished. When this is done, a lot of diplomatic credentials are going to be revoked. The PMC team's radios crackled with final preparations. Through her cameras, Sarah watched them double-check weapons, confirm positions, prepare for breach. Their confidence was absolute. They thought they had every angle covered. 10 seconds, Victor announced. Sarah's system showed all pieces in position. Emily's broadcast package would disrupt their communications. Tommy's positioned hostages would block their prepared fields of fire. Old Joe's Budapest surprise waited in the shadows. 5 seconds. Above, the PMC teams tensed for action. Their backup units were nearly in position, diplomatic credentials about to become their biggest liability. FBI surveillance platforms recorded everything. Sarah, Professor said quietly, I have to know. The bakery, the servers, the whole setup, how much was real? Through her screens, she watched the final moments of preparation. 8 years of cover about to be blown. A lifetime of hunting culminating in one operation. The recipes were real, she replied, fingers hovering over her keyboard. Everything else was bait. Breach teams in position, the PMC leader whispered. On my mark. Sarah thought of all the mornings serving coffee, all the regulars who'd become unexpected allies, all the tiny pieces of this massive operation falling into place. La Cazadora had never truly retired. She'd just found bigger prey. Director Kane, she addressed Elizabeth, ready to rewrite some international relationships? Do it, Elizabeth commanded. Show them why La Cazadora was always more than just a hunter. Sarah's finger moved to the final key. In the seconds before chaos erupted, she allowed herself one last moment of appreciation for the elegance of it all. The best traps were the ones your targets built themselves. Time to earn that. Reputation, she said softly. Then she pressed the key, and 8 years of preparation exploded into action. The PMC teams breached simultaneously from 4 points, their execution flawless. Flashbangs erupted, doors blew inward, and tactical teams flowed into the bakery like a well-oiled machine. Everything went exactly as their stolen protocols dictated. That was their first mistake. Emily Chen's broadcast package activated the moment they crossed the thresholds. Every piece of their advanced combat gear, communication systems, tactical displays, night vision, had been calibrated using specifications stolen from Sarah's servers. Now those systems received precisely targeted electromagnetic pulses, transforming cutting-edge equipment into expensive paperweights. What the team leader's curse cut off as his radio died. Fun fact about the Caracas Protocol. Sarah's voice echoed through the bakery's speaker system. I always included a back door. Always. The PMC operators found themselves in a tactical nightmare. Their careful formations, designed to control every angle, now worked against them. The hostages they'd planned to use as leverage were positioned to block their prepared fields of fire. Every pre-planned movement now led them deeper into a trap. Old Joe, Sarah commanded, show them Budapest. The elderly regular customer moved like liquid shadow. 3 operators went down before they realized the harmless old man was a legend in his own right. Their weapons, compromised by Emily's electronic warfare, offered only clicking sounds instead of gunfire. Tommy, your turn. The teenage barista dropped his act instantly. His asthma attack had positioned him perfectly to disable the bakery's front team. Years of accidentally demonstrated moves now flowed into devastating efficiency. Professor, Sarah called through her comm, watch your screen. This is why La Cazadora specialized in non-lethal takedowns. Through the bakery's cameras, they watched her plan unfold. The PMC teams, finding their primary weapons useless, switched to backups, exactly as she'd predicted. But the bakery's environment had been prepared for this too. The conductive moisture she'd built up through careful environmental control now served its true purpose. Metal surfaces became treacherous, tactical gear conducted disabling shocks, and every attempt to regroup led them into pre-planned zones of disadvantage. Director Kane, Sarah reported, you're about to have some diplomatic situations to deal with. The backup teams, thinking to exploit the chaos, rushed in with their diplomatic credentials and government-grade equipment. They found their gear just as useless, their tactics just as compromised. Years of studying stolen hunter protocols had taught them to fight exactly how Sarah wanted them to fight. 7 down, old Joe reported calmly, as if discussing the weather. Non-lethal complications only. 9 more, Tommy added, his voice professionally crisp. Emily's got 4 cornered in the display area. Sarah's fingers flew across her keyboard, coordinating the operation's final phases. Every screen showed another aspect of her trap closing. The PMC team's movements had become reactive, desperate. Their backup units found themselves caught between compromised positions and FBI surveillance. Sister, Victor Kane's voice carried deep satisfaction. Your surveillance platforms are getting everything. State Department's going to have kittens when they see this footage. Foreign operators conducting unauthorized operations on U.S. soil, Elizabeth replied. Using diplomatic cover to enable private military contractors, the international fallout will be significant. In the server room, Professor watched the tactical displays with growing amazement. You didn't just predict their moves, he realized. You choreographed them, every reaction, every fallback position. The best traps, Sarah quoted, are the ones your targets build themselves. They spent years studying how to fight like me. Never realized they were learning how to lose to me. Through her cameras, she watched the last pieces fall into place. The PMC teams, their sophisticated equipment reduced to dead weight, found themselves corralled into precisely prepared containment zones. The diplomatic backup units, realizing their cover was blown, faced an impossible choice between surrender and international incident. "Final count," Old Joe reported. 16 secured. Non-lethal, 8 more in controlled positions. 9 diplomats contained, Emily added, her theater background adding perfect timing to the report, all on camera. Sarah allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. 8 years of preparation, countless morning coffees and casual conversations, all building to this perfect convergence of planning and execution. "Director Kane," she addressed her true employer, "the bakery is secure, though I'm afraid we'll need some renovation work." "I think," Elizabeth replied dryly, "we can expense it as part of the largest counterintelligence operation in recent history. The FBI teams could move in now, making official arrests, documenting evidence. But first, Professor," Sarah turned to her former captor, "still think La Cazadora lost her edge?" His answer was interrupted by new alerts flashing across her screens. The operation wasn't quite finished. Victor Kane's vehicle was moving again, but this time he wasn't running. He was heading straight for the bakery. Victor Kane walked into the bakery like he owned it, stepping over subdued PMC operators with casual disregard. His expensive suit was immaculate, his smile confident. Through her cameras, Sarah watched him navigate the chaos he'd helped create, heading straight for the basement stairs. "You know," his voice carried down, "I always wondered who was better, the legendary La Cazadora, or the man who taught her everything she knows." Sarah's fingers stilled on her keyboard. "You taught me the basics, Victor. I perfected them." Professor looked between them, understanding dawning. "He was your mentor, until he decided playing both sides was more profitable," Sarah confirmed, watching Kane descend. "Though I have to admit, turning foreign intelligence services against each other while working with your sister, that's ambitious, even for you." Kane reached the bottom step, his smile never wavering. Someone had to push them into exposing themselves. What better way than offering them America's best hunter techniques? Everyone wanted the legendary La Cazadora's methods, while your sister's counterintelligence operation caught them all red-handed. Sarah nodded appreciatively. "Almost perfect." "Almost?" Kane raised an eyebrow. "You forgot the first rule you taught me." Sarah's voice hardened. "Always check if your target's playing dead." Kane's smile faltered slightly. Through her screens, Sarah watched Elizabeth Kane's FBI teams taking up new positions outside. The director herself had moved to a tactical command post, coordinating something her brother couldn't see. "La Cazadora died in Mexico," Sarah continued. "That's what everyone believed. The perfect cover for something bigger. But you knew I was still operating, still hunting." "Of course I knew," Kane scoffed. "I trained you. When all these retired hunters started setting up sophisticated data operations, I knew it had to be coordinated. You were always good at playing the long game, learned from the best." Sarah's fingers moved across her keyboard, initiating final sequences. "But you made one crucial mistake." "And what's that?" "You thought I was the target." Sarah allowed herself a small smile. "I was the bait." Kane's confident expression cracked as new information flashed across Sarah's screens. Across the country, other retired hunters were executing similar operations. Other foreign operators were being caught in compromising positions. Other diplomatic covers were being blown. But more importantly, certain very secure accounts were being drained. Certain hidden communications were being traced. Certain secret identities were being exposed. "You didn't just sell foreign services our techniques," Sarah explained. "You sold them compromised methods, helping Elizabeth expose their operations. But you also kept selling information back to them, playing all sides, building your own private intelligence empire." "The perfect operation," Kane admitted. Everyone so focused on the hunters, they never looked at the man connecting them. Almost perfect, Sarah corrected. Except Elizabeth knew. She always knew. You were dirty. She just needed proof that wouldn't compromise the larger operation. Kane's smile disappeared completely as he finally understood. I wasn't running you. You were running me. 8 years, Sarah confirmed. 8 years of letting you think you were the mastermind. Every piece of information you sold them. Every connection you made. Every account you built. All of it. Documented. All of it traced. Through her cameras, she watched Elizabeth Kane give the final signal. FBI teams began moving in precise formations, not to arrest the PMC operators or diplomatic agents, but to surround the bakery itself. You taught me to always have multiple targets, Sarah reminded him. The foreign operators were just the surface. You were always the real prey. Kane's hand moved toward his jacket, but Sarah was faster. The basement's environmental controls, so carefully calibrated over 8 years, had one final purpose. The conductive moisture in the air reached critical density. The student surpasses the master, Sarah said softly, and pressed the final key. Targeted electrical charges, precisely calibrated, dropped Kane before he could reach his weapon. As he fell, Sarah's screen showed his entire empire collapsing. Every account compromised, every contact exposed, every operation revealed. Target secured, she reported calmly to Elizabeth, though he might be a bit twitchy during questioning. 8 years of deep cover, Professor marveled. Not just hiding from foreign operators, but laying a trap for the biggest player of all. Sarah watched through her cameras as FBI teams entered. To take Kane into custody. The man who taught her to hunt had become her greatest trophy. La Cazadora's final hunt had claimed the most dangerous prey of all. You know what the best part is? She asked, no one in particular. My sourdough recipe really is award-winning. Sometimes the deepest cover was the one that wasn't a cover at all. 1 month later, Sarah stood in her rebuilt bakery, watching the morning sun paint Pine Creek in familiar shades of gold. The damage had been repaired, the servers relocated, the basement converted back to simple storage. On the surface, everything looked exactly as it had before, but nothing was quite the same. Your usual director? She asked, as Elizabeth Kane settled into what had been old Joe's tactical corner. The FBI director smiled, accepting the coffee with a nod. How's our mutual friend enjoying federal custody? Victor's being surprisingly cooperative, Elizabeth replied. Amazing how many hidden operations he's willing to expose to reduce his sentence. The morning regulars filtered in, some old, some new. Tommy still worked the counter, his training now official as a junior FBI analyst. Emily Chen had accepted a position consulting on undercover operations, her theater background proving invaluable. Old Joe had vanished back into whatever shadows had spawned him, though Sarah occasionally received postcards from impossible locations. Professor, granted. Immunity for his cooperation, now taught advanced tactical analysis at Quantico. His lectures on the importance of checking your target's background were particularly popular. The foreign services are still reeling, Elizabeth noted, watching Sarah knead dough with practiced ease. Amazing how many operations collapsed once. Their stolen techniques backfired. The diplomatic fallout will take years to settle. And the other hunters? Back to their covers mostly, though a few accepted official positions. Turns out running legitimate businesses while coordinating massive counterintelligence operations creates some unique skill sets. Sarah smiled, checking her security feeds out of habit. They were simpler now, focused on ordinary threats like shoplifters rather than international operators. But certain instincts never faded. Any regrets? Elizabeth asked. 8 years is a long time to play baker. Sarah considered this as she shaped the sourdough that had become Pine Creek's favorite. The cover became real somewhere along the way, she admitted. Turns out I'm actually pretty good at this. Good enough to maintain it, now that everyone knows who you really are. Through her windows, Sarah watched her town wake up. The regulars who'd helped spring her trap without realizing it. The community that had become more than just a cover story. La Cazadora caught her biggest prey, she replied. Maybe it's time for Sarah the baker to have her own legend. Elizabeth smiled knowingly. Of course, having a renowned bakery makes excellent cover for certain consulting work, especially regarding international operations. I might know something about that, Sarah agreed. The morning sun caught her tactical watch, still disguised as a vintage timepiece. Some habits were worth keeping. The bell chimed as new customers entered. Sarah readied her smile, her apron, her carefully maintained image of the simple small-town baker. But now everyone knew. Sometimes the most dangerous predators are the ones hiding in plain sight, especially if they make excellent sourdough.